deliberately closed for extensive repair and refurbishment. What happened in 1996 was that the Royal Court moved into two theatres in the commercial West End of London. One, the Duke of York's Theatre, where they staged The Weir, which is for a return to its old but dramatically altered building in October this year. It is staggering or interesting that it's 43 years, here we are 43 years later, talking about the Royal Court. And just the first question I'd like to ask Ian Rickson is this. Ian, I should say, wasn't even born when he got back in the stage, and I doubt he was even conceived or thought of. And here he is running this famous theatre.
To foster an environment where we can be a champion of writers' freedoms, where the work artistically and politically is progressive, and that might mean programming a play like Mojo, a first play in our theatre downstairs, or sending a playwright like Rebecca Pritchard into prisons. Out of that comes work. So when we meet people from that era, they say it's exactly what George Devine, who set up the English Stage Company, wanted. And those ideas continue to inspire and govern us.
You used the word politically progressive. Could you just pass the microphone to Max? I'd just like to ask Max, who I suspect had the longest tenure of any Royal Court director. That must be true.
That's a correct suspicion, Michael, yes.
Yeah. Ian used the word politically progressive. Is there an explicit political agenda at the Royal Court that determines the choice of play?
Well, I think the Royal Court has always had an anti-establishment stance, and has always been a naughty theatre in that sense, and that's defined the work right from the beginning. When I've been working in the theatre for about 4 or 5 years, my father said to me, "You're doing very well, and I'm very pleased with you, and I'm very proud of what you're doing." He said, "But you can't go on being anti-establishment forever. What are you going to do when you grow up?" So I think the answer is that the Royal Court never grows up, and that it's been very successful in not growing up, and in taking really a questioning and provocative attitude to the politics of the day. I think, if I could just return to the question you asked Ian earlier, that the Royal Court has changed and developed its philosophy over 43 years, although its ideals, as Ian says, are absolutely recognisable. And one of the ways it's changed is that I think when I first worked at the court, Bill Gaskill, who was he was the second director of the Royal Court, and he was very much a mentor of mine, believed that there were small plays and big plays, and that the two were born in heaven, and that there was either a play that was born to be put on the major stage. And I think one key fact of the Royal Court is that it seats 400, and that is quite a big space to put untried new work on, unsupported by stars. And that's always been both the dilemma and the salvation of the Royal Court, to find work that is public and big enough, and which took the pressure off new writing to an extent. But if you look at the plays that have been successful in the immediate past of the Royal Court's history, The Weir, Beauty Queen of Renown, Steward of Christendom, Shopping and Fucking.
And why is that?
Well, because the aesthetic is defined by the play and the playwright. I mean, and they change. So the theatre itself can have no dominant, overriding aesthetic to put onto a playwright. The playwright, they're very different. So the playwright inevitably will define the style of presentation, which can go from extreme naturalism to extreme expressionism to a poetic theatre. But it's very much dependent on the writer, not on the theory of the theatre.
I think the first observation is to comment on the immediate preceding period. I think it was widely observed in the 1980s, not only in England but across continental Europe, that the most progressive work that was happening in the theatre was in other fields than playwriting. Many people felt that what was contemptuously called text-based theatre, in other words, plays, were not the future. And the position of the writer was dethroned for a period, and in England a number of important companies like Complicité and other companies were interested in new kinds of theatrical language, which were more visual, which paid more attention to design and to the physicality of performance. And that, I think, contributed to an erosion of confidence in playwriting. And by the end of the 1980s and early 90s, I think you as a critic and many others were commenting that playwrights were not emerging at the pace that they had done in the 1950s and 60s. I think that's firstly to do with conditions in theatre. Hopefully the Royal Court is, as a writer's theatre, putting, as Ian Rickson said, putting the writer at the centre of the process is the best starting point. But that doesn't fully account for the recent wave of writers. I think it's principally led by individual theatres and their artistic policy.
Do you feel, when you work at the court, that you are actually at the centre of the process?
Yeah, I do feel that. I mean, I think directors really do serve the work of writers. So I do feel very much at the centre of the process. And I think the court take an interest in the development of writing ideas and where they're going from play to play as well. So yeah, I do feel at the centre.
Should we get a critic's response as well? Yes, Susanna Cladd.
I've been very struck. I speak as somebody who doesn't have a background in theatre criticism. I came from publishing and literary journalism and so on. And what's struck me coming to theatre criticism newly is the huge gap, as I see it, in the literary establishment between non-dramatic work and other dramatic work. In other words, nobody ever comments, apart from in specially corralled theatre columns, for example, in the pages of the Times Literary Supplement or in the journal I used to work on, the London Review of Books, on dramatic work. I mean, hardly ever. There is perceived to be a complete chasm between the two things. I don't see why this should be so. And indeed, people don't read play texts, it seems to me. I mean, if you see somebody reading a play text on the tube in London, you know there's somebody who works in the theatre. There's somebody to do with that. You don't see them reading them in the way they read novels. It's a mystery to me why, because actually it's one of the most accessible forms of reading. People get a lot of pleasure from it, and when you read some of the most successful contemporary novels, they are indeed written, as critics continually complain, as play texts. So, I mean, there seems to be something that could be developed there. Coming really back to what Graham was talking about, one of the things that has impressed me about the court is the proactive policy of going to writers in a way which bridges this gap. In other words, seeking out novelists, and indeed, in my view, perhaps more important, the possibility of seeking out non-fiction writers who might write plays. This seems to me something that should go further and which is important and really interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the court has to be both reactive to what's happening in the culture as well as extremely proactive. And whether that's talking to interesting non-fiction writers or going into schools or paying attention to a country, you go to where the places are that you think you'll get writing. And often, it seems to me, the interesting plays come from the corners of society, the edges of society, rather than the centre. So you have to be vigilant and intrepid about going into those areas.
Just before we get on to the detail, I do want to talk in detail about how the Royal Court operates. Can we just pursue the question which I threw at Graham, and no one else has yet had time to talk about, which is what's been going on in the culture in Britain in the last 5 years that has stimulated this? I take Graham's point, which is that if you have the institution which is hungry for the work, that will then tend to breed the work. I think that's absolutely right and true.
Is to just get as many plays out there as possible and create a sense of energy through doing that. And I think we were very lucky at the time that we started maybe 5 years ago, in that there were some really, really good young plays around, and in a way us kind of cranking up the work rate, which is what we did, which was I think part of what created this sense of energy, was something that really came through a sense that there were a lot of plays out there that needed to be done, and then that energy has its own rewards. But what it means for us practically is that we have to work incredibly fast to do 19 plays in 2 small theatres. It means we rehearse plays for 4 weeks and they tend to play for something between 3 and 6 weeks, and then they're gone, and you're straight into the next play. So the real culture in which writers actually never see their work on a stage. But I think to answer a little bit your thing about the so people are angry about the culture that they live in, but they have no clear one single artistic, aesthetic route for expressing it. So the work is
new plays going on all the time, and being close to the actual space that you're writing for, because I think it is a physical language as well, and being close to the physical space of theatre.
Of the new generation, moral disgust of the new generation with the values they've inherited. I mean, is that a reality? Can I just ask you that question? I mean, do you actually feel a disgust with the world that you have grown up in, or not?
Yeah, I think part of
prepared. We translated plays, we produced plays, we invited stranger director to direct the plays, and using espace publication. But exactly for this reason, this meeting was really important, because possibly it was the first time that we met nor an institution, nor, for example, a center, of studies on playwriting, but the theatre, which is absolutely different. Somebody told me, possibly Rebecca. It's really important, because you think that people choosing plays or working on playwriting, not only choosing the best, started not really an interest, but doubts about the fact that playwriting and new playwriting was not interesting. It was like an important confirmation, and for us, like a mirror, even if we were small, not prepared, even if, of course. And what is interesting, I really agree about the fact that staging new playwriting means that it's music. We were talking a lot about music, and I absolutely agree. I started saying a word which was like, bad word, that one. Technica. I was surprised for many things. The first meeting we had, somebody told me, oh, the writers you want to invite, great, but you have to choose before the play. And then depending on the writer, was never in it. So it was surprising, but interesting. And when I say music, I mean really that from my point of view, the work on a new play is really a trip to travel. So, of course, the style is not the same. Of course, there is a big work to do, even if you respect. What does it mean? Nothing. Respecting.
Can I...
Yes, the phone has not stopped ringing, and Graham probably can talk more about that, because he knows just the huge number of Royal Court plays that are being done all over the world. I think when Barbara said it was the right moment when Intercity came in, I think I started in the early 90s trying to get people in theatres in Europe interested in Royal Court plays, and I approached a theatre in Germany, and I won't mention it, and gave them 30 different writers, and I was told no one was really interested in this work at all. And just a couple of years later, after the exchange developed with the Baraka at the Deutsches Theater, everyone wanted these plays. It was an amazing transition within just a couple of years, which coincides with the transition that happened within Britain. But the Royal Court's interest internationally is very much about developing reciprocal and long-term relationships with theatres all over the world, and in finding energy in new writing that we can celebrate together. I think we're not just interested in giving out our plays abroad or in receiving plays and putting them on. We see ourselves now as an international theatre, and we take part in the development of plays, and I think we're being pioneers in a sense, in that we're not only working with the director and the playwright and the actors.
But then being in a culture where there are a lot of other young playwrights as well, and being close to a theatre where you see new plays going on all the time, and being close to the actual space that you're writing.
not only choosing the best place, because if you want to have best place, you have to have writer and research and summer school and whatever. Means that everybody has a different relation with place. It's not only an intellectual point of view.